I think it's time for us to build the sysport to store the systainers. But first, here's the jingle. Welcome back. If you're new to the channel, thank you for turning up. Today we're going to be building the sysport across this back wall to store our Festool systainer collection. It's going to be a multi-part series, so don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification button so you don't miss an episode. Let's get cracking. This is the area where the sysport is going to go to. It's about 2.3 meters long, 2,300 millimeters. We're coming out a depth of 400 millimeters, and the overall height will be what it needs to be to support the sustainers, to store the sustainers we've got. If you've not seen the design video, pause this one, go and check it out. There's a link here. And that'll help you understand how I got to this point of working out what I'm going to do. Job one is I want to put the first panel on the floor here to give me the base, to give me a level base. I know the floor's not level, it slopes, high points on the right hand side, and it slopes down to the left hand side by quite a bit actually. So first job, I'm going to put the base on there and level that up. I'm using pine board to build the sysport with. I can get this cheaper than I can get the equivalent plywood, which is why I tend to use it. Panels come 2,400 millimeters long, 400 millimeters wide, 18 millimeters thick. The distance for the base panel is going to be 2,310 millimeters. That gives me a bit of room either side. So the next job is to cut this thing down to 2,310 millimeters, and then we can fit it and level it up in that area. I'm using the support arm from the Capex saw. If you saw that video, you'll see those in use. Go and check that out now. And I've also bought a second bracket here to hold it to the MFT, and that gives me again a perfect 90 degrees between the extension and my guide. So butting this up hard against there gives me a guaranteed 90 degree cut, which is what we're looking for. So job one, I'm going to come in and measure our 2,310, which is there. Bring my guide down, and now I can just line that up with my cutting edge, which is there. Setting the depth on the TS55 to 18 millimeters plus a little bit, so call it 20 millimeters on the FS, the track position. Check that for square, and that is perfect. I want to position this panel so it comes out 400 millimeters from the paneling on the wall, and that will give me the depth I need to store the sysports. This paneling does sit away from the wall, and it sits away from the wall by approximately 60 millimeters. So if I take a distance from my wall, 460 millimeters, that's a good place for this panel to be. So that's what I'm going to do. 460 at that end. With that distance measured, I'm just going to put some small lines on the floor so I can quickly line this up again. Now I know where the board is in relationship to the wall, the next job is to get it level. I know this part of the floor is higher than this part of the floor, and dropping a spirit level on top of the board confirms that. I used some shims to lift this end of the board, then measured the gap, and the gap came out at 18 millimeters. So how lucky was that? The offcut of wood that I used from the board, I've now put underneath the end point there, and that gives me a level surface. So I'm now going to cut a few more shims. I'm going to cut one round about 12mm thick. I'll cut one round about 8mm thick, and then I'll put those in position on the floor, and that should give me a stable surface. To make the shims, I'm just going to use an old scrap piece of wood. This actually came from the temporary bench that you may have saw in the early workshops. I'm going to cut this down to 400mm on the Capex saw. Having cut that down to 400mm in length or thereabouts, I then just want to put a mark on the edge of this wood at 9mm, and then we'll just position that shim underneath that board. So I'm setting my set square to around about 9mm, actually it's 10mm, near enough. I'm just going to draw a couple of reference lines on that board. I want to use the TS55 and the MFT3 table to make this cut. I'm going to use some of the clamps from the MFT3 clamping system that we reviewed the other day, the video here. First one is I want to use the reference bar, so that's secure to the table and the edge is well away from the cutting surface. I can now go ahead and line up this piece of wood against that surface, against that reference point, and make sure that is against the guide. And now I can lightly, and I mean lightly, just clamp that up a little bit of pressure. That gives me a reference point there. I then want to bring in the second piece of wood, and that's purely so that when this rail comes down, it's not going to twist and distort. It's got something for the weight of the TS55 to sit on. And now I can bring in this second clamp and just lightly touch that up. Now to check that these lines are all still lined up, and that's it. This material is nominal 38mm thick, so I'm going to set this to 40mm. There we have it. We've now got a 10mm shim that's 400mm long that we can use in the wood. So I've now made 3 shims, one at 14mm, one at 10mm and one at 5mm. Now I can come back over here and I can just work out where they fit. My 10mm one is going to come in here. 5mm is going to be here. 14mm will be roughly there. So that's it. So I now can put those shims on the base of that board and that board is now going to give me a smooth flat area for us to work on. So with our shims cut, we've marked where they're going to go on the board. I'm now working on the bottom of the board obviously, so this turns round, so this is my front edge. I want to mount these in position and we'll simply glue and screw, and I want to have an offset at the front to allow for an 18mm trim further down the project. I'm actually going to set these back by 20mm and that will give me a 2mm gap, a shadow line if you will. It just makes things look a little bit neater than having everything flush. So we put some glue on. Make sure the glue is nicely spread out. Line that up. Make sure it is square and set it back by 20 millimeters. Supporting the wood, a couple of small pilot holes. And obviously the screws are there just to give the glue a chance to dry. I don't want to clamp this and wait for it to dry. Find some screws that are of a good size so they don't go all the way through the board, and secure into place. There we go. Board's now in position. It's now supported. There's a small gap. I need to put some trim in, but we will wait until we get some spare timber to do that. If you remember the design video, this is the layout of our sysports. So 4 sysports, and then there's a gap to take us to the end wall. So I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 panels. So the next job is to cut these down to 1024. Again, I'm using the pine board, same length, 2.4 meters long, 400 millimeters wide, 18 millimeters thick. And I want to start by just taking off this factory edge. From that reference cut, I now want to measure down 102.4. 102.4. I then want to turn this board around because I want to reference off this end. So I now have my reference line. I can slide that up to my 0 clearance, and now I'm going to use the flag stop to set that for a repeatable cut. Once that rail's locked down, of course. Okay. Okay. So now I can just batch these out. That's it, that's our panels cut down, our 5 panels, all cut to length, all the same, using the MFT3 table. And now I want to work out the spacings of these on the base panel. We'll look at that next time. Thanks for watching.